Welcome to Muslims and Mental Health with Sister Heather, a groundbreaking program looking at mental health issues through the biopsychosocial spiritual paradigm.
Welcome to Muslims and Mental Health. Today we're going to discuss famous and important historical African American Muslims. We will join today by Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. But before we get to him, I would just like to mention again some basic facts that we've discussed in other episodes about the African American Muslim community. As we've mentioned in previous episodes, the African American Muslim community makes up the largest population of indigenous Muslims in America. So, a very significant population when it comes to talking about the American Muslim community. It's very important as both clinicians and for the broader society to understand its relevance. And so today we have decided to cover some historical people in order to educate the community about that. It just so happens that we are also recording on a very historical day, 50 years post the assassination of Brother Malcolm X, who is known by both the Muslim community and the larger, broader society, as well as the international society. So it just so happens that we are recording on a day that, in and of itself, that has significance. So at this time, I would like to introduce Brother Abdullah to you, and just to give you an idea about who Brother Abdullah is. Brother Abdullah bin Hamid Ali teaches Islamic law, jurisprudential principles, and the prophetic tradition at Zaytuna College in Berkeley, California. He holds a collegiate license, Ijaza Uliya, and Islamic law, Sharia, from the prestigious Al-Qarawiyyin University of Fez, Morocco, and master's in ethics and social theory from the Graduate Theological Union, and is pursuing a PhD in cultural and historical studies in religion from the same university. He has served as an adjunct professor of Arabic language at UC Berkeley and an adjunct professor of Intro to Islam at Graduate Theological Union. His current study interests are racial identity construction and Black North African reactions to anti-Black legal and theological teachings in the Maliki and other schools of Islamic law. In addition to all of that, Brother Abdullah has also founded Lamppost Productions. This is an education initiative teaching people about Islam and Islamic principles and values. Thank you for coming and joining us today, Brother Abdullah. It's such an honor to have you here on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I would like to start by talking about the topic of famous and historical African American Muslims in our community, our American community. And I want to ask you, who are the African American Muslims in America?
Well, as you had already alluded to, Heather, that the African American Muslims are the largest block of Muslims in the United States, up to about 42% of the American Muslim population, which is, between 6 to 8 million. Are African American Muslims. Now, of course, the African American, the term itself has probably transformed by now due to the immigration of a lot of people, Muslims from Africa, and so many of them also would be classified as African Americans post 1965, people from Somalia, among other places. However, prior to that, I think we can say that those who were referred to as African American Muslims or as Black Muslims as well were those people who were somewhat, we would say, indigenous to the Americas and have gone through many, some very negative, some very, and all others very positive experiences while being here in the United States. And I think it's important that when we speak about African American Muslims, that the African American part, it has to be emphasized because that in itself says something about a collective experience that we've had. And what is spoken about by certain scholars with regard to the African American community is that even prior to the Civil War, that there were these two basic paradigms that were predominant amongst the African American community. One paradigm is what we call the integrationist paradigm, and then we have the other paradigm, the sort of separatist nationalist paradigm. And so, for instance, Frederick Douglass represented the sort of integrationist paradigm, and his colleague, Mr. Martin Delany, he represented the other. And so Frederick Douglass, of course, his ideas were that, listen, this is our home. We don't know anything about Africa, and so we're staying. We want to continue to struggle here. Mr. Delaney, among other people, let's go back to Africa. And so that particular paradigm still exists in the African American community, both Muslim and non-Muslim. So when we come into the Muslim part of that particular term, or this combination of African American Muslim, that it needs to be understood that the Muslims largely have adopted throughout most of our history the sort of separatist paradigm, because defining the Muslim, I'm not necessarily going to define Muslim on the basis of orthodoxy, I would say. Muslim, if a person calls himself a Muslim, I would say, okay, well, we'll speak about Muslim in those terms and not get into all of the usual types of arguments that people would get into and say that person not really Muslim, so we can't include them as part of our history. Even though other Muslims do the same thing with regard to their history, people who would consider to be heretics by certain groups were accepted as or mentioned as Muslims. So for instance, you asked about what African American Muslims are, and so I'm defining it now. And I'm not totally sure if you really want me to go into like examples of those particular people, but I just wanted to at least lay the sort of groundwork right there that needs to be understood, that African Americans, these two basic paradigms, are very much still predominant in our community. And so the Muslims themselves have largely, until recently, have adopted the more separatist paradigm, and there are different reasons for why many of them have adopted the integrationist paradigm, in my opinion, today.
I really appreciate you explaining that, because if you look at the Pew study, for example, when they did the demographic study of Muslims in America, they really have a very low estimate as to what the population of African Americans is. I think it's around 20% or something. Mm-hmm. And before their study and other studies, which seem to bolster the immigrant population numbers, it was always thought typically that the African American Muslims make up about 45%, which is really close to the 42% that you mentioned. And I'm really glad that you brought clarity to that, because the Pew study itself had some methodological issues with only looking at people who had, quote, Muslim names, which would, that would certainly exclude me. My name doesn't sound like a Muslim name particularly. And I imagine a lot of African American Muslims as well did not take on so-called Muslim names or Arab names necessarily.
Arabic names, yeah.
So I really appreciate you clearing that up. But I do want to move on a little bit and ask you about who some of these African American Muslims are, particularly who you would call the most famous African American Muslims in America.
Right. Again, not focusing on the ideas of orthodoxy, that we have to begin probably with the individual known as the Noble Drew Ali, who established what is called the Moorish Science Temple. And of course, this particular movement was proto-Islamic or syncretic Islamic, and also syncretized other religious beliefs into that particular movement, and then eventually we have, coming after that, the Nation of Islam, which was founded by Elijah Muhammad and referred to as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And in Elijah Muhammad is, we can say that because of his efforts, because of his teachings, and then of course his success in appropriating someone like Malcolm X, our hero, today. May Allah have mercy on him, and he himself was responsible for, I would say, mainstreaming Islam in America. That Islam, of course, was on the rise, and then all of a sudden it became somewhat mainstream because they dealt with issues not only that were particular to Muslims, but issues that were common with all Black people. And so Elijah Muhammad is important. Noble Drew Ali, Malcolm X is definitely an extremely important personality. And then after Malcolm X, I would say the next most important personality would be Imam W.D. Muhammad, who, may Allah have mercy on him, who died in 2008. and was responsible for transitioning the Nation of Islam from its old racist, anti-white teachings into what we call today's Sunni or Orthodox Islam. And it took a lot of courage for him to do that. And in another sense too, he was much before his time, just like Malcolm, because Imam W.D. Muhammad, and this was something that I couldn't appreciate as well when I was very young. My parents, they come through the Nation of Islam experience. You know, they were followers of Elijah Muhammad, and then they followed his son W.D. Muhammad. And while I was younger, I really couldn't really appreciate the benefit of this until much later in my life, naturally. Because by the time I was born, I didn't really get the full indoctrination into the Nation of Islam teachings anyway. But I say that Imam W.D. Muhammad was before his time because what I remember coming up is that there was a lot of negative energy focus against him because of him being perhaps the first person to accept that, listen, we are Americans, you see. So we're not Africans, we're African Americans. So as Muslims, we're Americans, and so he was an individual who encouraged Muslims to integrate, to become part of the American for the infrastructure, join the military, join the FBI, join the police force, and these are all things at the time when he was saying them, they were held to be somewhat anathema to our community, most of our community, African American community included. And I remember someone had written an anonymous booklet about him, calling him a government agent. And so it's really funny that that's the way things were prior to 9/11, and then like now after 9/11, everybody's celebrating just how American they are, but much of that we have different reasons for why we didn't want to be considered Americans, both immigrants and the more indigenous community, but those are definitely some of the most important names, I would say, of the past and of American history.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's an interesting point, bringing up the pre-9/11 and post-9/11, because of the social programming that came out of the nation and W.D. Muhammad communities. You had this amazing social programming, and you have some of the best security people now are from these communities.
Right, exactly.
And so that full integration, because of the African American history, and we're in African American History Month, and the lack of structural access, I think, there's a whole another conversation we could have there around why that happened, why it was pre-9/11 one way and post 9/11 another way.
Right.
These are really good points, and I have some more questions I want to ask you. But
Yes.
We're going to need to take a short break, and we'll be back with you in just a minute. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
Welcome back to Muslims and Mental Health. Today we are discussing famous and important historical African American Muslims in America. I'm joined today by Brother Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, and we're going to continue our conversation. We left off talking about who famous African American Muslims in the community were, and we're going to continue by moving forward and looking a little forward in history at who are the African American Muslims in more modern history who are influential to the community. So, Brother Abdullah, could you give us some insight on that?
Yeah, I would say that even though, again, a very controversial figure for our times, and definitely since the transition of the Nation of Islam from the old teachings into the new or more mainstream teachings, Minister Louis Farrakhan is still very much a very important figure in America, not just in the African American Muslim community, even though, of course, for more mainstream Muslims, perhaps not so much, but for the mainstream blacks, Mr. Louis Farrakhan is an individual who actually maintains a very positive image in the eyes of most African Americans, and he's looked upon as being one of the truly authentic leaders, black leaders, probably more authentic than any other of the black leaders that are out there. And it's important for us to acknowledge this. And of course, people will say, because we think about the assassination of Malcolm, and it's likely that certain words that were spoken by Minister Farrakhan had something to do with his assassination, and Allah knows best. But in spite of all of that, he still is very influential. He's very important. As a matter of fact, at times I think that if he was to pass before we ourselves in the community were to get our act together with regard to bridging the gap between our Muslim and non-Muslim family members and our neighbors, that I fear at times that that it would create a vacuum such that it would actually allow for the African American, perhaps Christians, and those who are some of them somewhat antagonistic towards blacks, it would actually turn them on the African American community, and in doing so, that in itself would undermine even the security of the non-black Muslim community, because when you don't have such a significant minority group backing you as an ally, then I think it's very dangerous for us, going forward. So there's something we definitely need to acknowledge there. Outside of him, the more mainstream in terms of their accepted beliefs of individuals who are important, I believe, right now, and we know the most influential, or I would mention three in particular. One of them is Imam Siraj Wahhaj, founder of MANA, Muslim Alliance in North America. And he's well known, as we know, not only in America, but also in the other English-speaking countries. Imam Siraj Wahhaj is extremely important, extremely influential. And then
he's located in New York, right? Correct?
Yes. In New York, yes, right. At Masjid Taqwa in New York is his main mosque. And then, of course, Imam Zaid Shakir, who is one of the people I work with on a regular basis here at Zaytuna College, is definitely another very important figure. And then lastly, Dr. Sherman Jackson. He himself has a very extremely important role to play in all of this, especially taking into consideration that before he had written his Islam and the Black American, I believe that our community was going in a direction where we were completely abandoning our connection to the African American community altogether. That we are accepting the mainstream sort of recent immigrant narrative, and we were somewhat turning a blind eye to matters of injustice in society. We didn't have concern about our history or any of those type of things, and I think that with the publication of that book, it really woke up a lot of people. It really made people see that, there's some value in what the Nation of Islam and Elijah Muhammad and Farrakhan and all these people had to say, and their contribution to a black religion to Islam in America. That there's a lot there that needs to be acknowledged as well, and you can acknowledge those things without being considered a heretic for doing so. But then the book itself was even important for non-blacks. Right. I know plenty of Black of non-black Muslims who have been inspired by that book, just as many whites were inspired by Malcolm X's his autobiography. Right here at Zaytuna College, we have a youth our student group called the Third Resurrection. Inspired by Dr. Jackson's book. With the Lamppost Education Initiative, Dr. Jackson is one of the people we try to feature more than anyone else. And over the years, I would think that I would say, and I've told him this before, that, I don't think there's anyone who's advocated for you more than we have, and your sort of your very unique insights. So those are some of the things, some of the people I would say today are extremely important for us to keep our eyes on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. As a white American Muslim, I have even found a benefit in some of Minister Farrakhan's statements. He really keeps the American discussion on a conscientious level. Like, he doesn't let things slide by, and people may feel that's very controversial, but I appreciate the honesty that he brings to the table. Now, I may not always agree with him, but I do appreciate him being at the table and bringing that honesty to bear at the table.
Right.
So I agree with you. It's not, it's not just a black leadership for the black community. Black leaders lead the whole community, and that can't be overlooked. Okay, so I want to move on and ask you, what do you think is often missed about, this kind of continues on with where we're going. What do you think is often missed about this segment of the community in terms of its relevance?
Yeah, I think that what's missed often is that the experiences of blacks in America has given them a type of insight and a type of an outlook on America that is very balanced in some regards, in my opinion. Of course, there are always going to be some extreme examples of this as well, but our experiences of America do not allow for us to simply digest the false narrative of the American ideal, because we've experienced what the American ideal really looks like, and so, like, being individuals who have experienced it and continue to experience it in many different levels, institutionally, that it allows for us to be somewhat cynical, but of course, we don't want to be too cynical, but it has its importance. I'll give you an example. We know of the recent murders in North Carolina, unfortunately, and then there's also a murder in Canada where a young man went to answer the door, and then someone shot through the door and killed him. Now seeing these type of things occur for me, that, of course, they're terrible things, horrible things that happen, and but there weren't things that would necessarily inspire fear in my heart to make me afraid that when I walk outside that something's going to happen to me. And but then when I spoke with some of my immigrant, or we call, for lack of a better term, immigrant brothers and sisters about this, and I find out that a lot of people are very afraid now. They're afraid and afraid to go out. A young sister yesterday came to me and told me that her friend called her. She lives in Tennessee, and said to her that her husband was worried about her going out with her hijab on. He wanted her to take it off, but she herself didn't want to take off her hijab, So there's a lot of fear created by these type of incidents, and of course, not that we shouldn't be vigilant. We shouldn't be foolhardy, but my historical, my experience with America, with the West, we would call it, or even white America, if you want to call it that, has been a type of experience where it's like certain things you almost just expect it, and so you kind of become a little bit numb to it, I guess you would say, but at the same time, we know that when people are speaking about how they mean good for everyone, especially on the sort of state level, that is, there's a bit of a forked tongue type of conversation there, and I think that's an important thing for people to remember, that we've had experience, we know this and we understand the way that this generally works, and so hopefully we can advise other people, and moving forward in their attempts to integrate.
I think that would be a wonderful blessing if the community would open up in such a way to allow for the African American experience, to translate to the experiences that they are now having in a post 9/11 world, because there's a lot of fruit to be gained from what African Americans have been experiencing for a very long time in America. But a question came up for me in my mind as you were talking about the African American experience. Do you think, in terms of therapy and psychology, do you think some of those structural barriers that African Americans have experienced in the overall structure of America have made it difficult to seek therapy? I mean, is it a matter of trust, or what do you think is going on there?
Yeah, I think it's totally about trust. It's totally a matter of trust and who determines, who's sick and who's not. And, certain types of actions looked upon as being, white type of things and as opposed to black type of things. And so some of the more or the less educated among us, they still sort of carry a lot of these type of things with them, but they're suffering in the meantime. And, so those are the extreme examples, of course, and there are a lot of those examples. They're extreme examples. There's a lot of extreme sort of examples we do have in our community, but it's because of the conditioning, of decades and sometimes centuries as well that led people to be that way. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to ask you a couple more questions, and then we're going to have a few fun questions, but one along those lines, what do you think can be done to spread this historical knowledge of this segment of the community? And then I also want to ask you at the same time, what do you think would be most beneficial and a positive change for the community and sort of breaking down some of those barriers that we just talked about?
Right. Well, one, for the first question with regards to like what we can do to preserve this historical material, we've already started that. I think more and more books have been written about the African American experience. Much more anthropological work is starting to be done with many of the Muslims in local cities, Chicago, Atlanta, Philadelphia. When people are starting to document their history, they're starting to go to interview a lot of the elders. My mother has been featured in a couple of documentaries. Allah have mercy on her. And so that's definitely one of the ways to begin it, and then expose that and preserve it and teach it. As with regard to things we can do to perhaps begin some of these sort of healing. I personally had this idea because it's related to my area of study, of specialization with regard to sort of identity construction and race, that I have an idea that, and of course it's not, I don't think it's really unique, but what I do think that needs to happen is we have to create forums that where individuals who represent, I guess you'd say, the different sides of conflict, of historical conflict, can come together, and everyone is able to articulate their particular understanding, their anxieties, and their wishes for a better future, but in an environment and atmosphere where people don't feel that they'll be judged for doing so. So, for instance, a white person may speak, honestly about how he or she feels about Black people, and what has led them and what they understand has led them to feel and perceive of Black people in that way. That they should be able to do so without feeling that they're going to be judged for just simply speaking, being honest about the way they feel. Because we have to applaud a person like that who come forward to actually expose themselves to the potential critique and attacks of others. But what often happens in conversations about race in particular is that, unfortunately, many of our own people, have a tendency to sort of shut down and, and force others to shut down and sort of, it becomes like a pile all up on Whitey type of exchange, you see, so we have to be able to take criticism and also give it as well, So I just think that how can we structure a way where we can actually have those conversations where they actually turn out to be productive, that people are actually learning things, about one another, In Black Muslims, I've already started a number of talks that I've had about just race construction, like I recently had one in Atlanta, and people were blown away, because it made people think differently about their own identities as something totally new for them, you see, so, yeah.
It sounds very Quranic, actually. And
Yes.
and the ayah is about we created you to know one another,
Right.
and
Exactly.
so it sounds like good work to me.
Right.
It sounds like you're talking about safe communication, like
Mm-hmm.
creating spaces with safe communication, and I think that you're onto something there. And I appreciate you joining me today to begin this conversation. I'm sure we're going to return to this conversation often. And inshallah, maybe one day you can rejoin us to continue the conversation. I do want to ask you a few fun questions that we do with interviews at the end of them. And one of them is, who is your Muslim hero, if you have one, and why?
Yeah, this question of like who's my Muslim hero is at times I guess you feel uneasy to say someone other than the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Especially in the African American community where I come from, people, tough people, and so when I was growing up, Umar ibn Khattab was like the favorite Sahabi,
Oh, okay.
for the African American community. But the main reason that many of the people considered him to be their hero was because of what they read about Omar. Omar was rough, he was just, and he would let somebody have it, but they're not looking at the sensitive side of Umar ibn Khattab. I personally do feel as well that if we're talking about from the early Islamic history, that I do personally accept and believe that, I mean, for me, Omar is some of my hero, but it's not simply because, he was fair and he was just, and he would go and he would let somebody have it, if they were disrespected the Prophet or something like that. No, but it's also because when you see how he reigned, and his concern for the people, that he went out and checked on the people, the poor, to make sure that they were taken care of and people were not starving to death. And he himself as an individual probably, as the books mentioned, that he had only maybe 2 or 3 different changes of clothing. As the Khalifa, that he was a humble person. You see. And and as the Prophet said, well, one hadith is attributed to the Prophet. He said that if there was a Prophet after me, it would have been Umar. And the scholars, of course, they differ about the authenticity of the hadith, but there you can see when you look at his reign, there are many different reasons to respect him. Now, of course, modern day times, without a doubt, my hero is Malcolm. Malcolm is my hero. And I see some of those same characteristics reflected from by Omar and Malcolm, and that's what I think makes me love him and consider him to be my hero.
That's wonderful. It's a nice balance of strength and yet at the same time mercy type.
Yes, right.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So what is your favorite concept in Islam and why?
My favorite concept in Islam, I mean, of course, there are many different concepts that are very wonderful, but I think that my favorite concept in Islam would be the concept of 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 well, I'm thinking of a way to characterize it, but I guess the way I would characterize it would be the very freedom to act, the freedom to act, and that freedom being the foundation or the basis for reward and punishment. That is to say that that God will reward me or God will punish me mainly on the basis of my choices, at least what I understand and what I believe, and as opposed to just simply the mistakes that I make. That forgiveness is always, a door always open to God. That we know mercy is an extremely important aspect of the Islamic teachings. Every surah except for Tawbah is preceded by Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah's one special name is Ar-Rahman. And so I would say that the issue of forgiveness and its connection to the will to act and do things and choose good from evil.
Okay, and what is your favorite word and why?
My favorite Arabic Islamic word, I think I would say would be al-haq, the word haq, and the reason I choose that word is because it has so much meaning wrapped up in it. That the word haq, it translates sometimes as truth, and And Allah is al-haq, the truth, the real, the true reality, and haq, the truth is said to be, of course, the main goal of philosophy, that we're seeking the truth. The truth will set you free. Al-haq is it means that, but it also means a right. It can mean a right, but also can mean an obligation too. So the word haq, reminds us of the fact that Islam is not just a personal experience, a personal sort of endeavor that is both private and it is public as well. So the idea of rights and responsibilities, obligations is also wrapped up in haq as well. So and then the real, the part of it that means real, what the reality. Allah tells us that Yawm al-Qiyamah, that He's going to tell us the haq of what we did. You see, we'll think we did things sincerely for Allah, but Allah will tell us, that there was a little bit of ostentation there. There's a little bit of that there, So haq, I would say, such a short notice, of the question. It's like I think that's probably the most important word in my life because it also reminds of justice, reminds of balance, and I think that's fundamentally what. Like the one verse of the Quran says, He created the heavens and earth bil haq, with truth. You see. And so it's become my favorite word.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think that the conversation has been very enlightening, and I think that for our audience, it will reach a lot of people who've not heard about this before. And I think that will be good, and it will hopefully open more doors and communication and understanding, between the diverse communities that exist both within our community and in the dominant culture. So I really appreciate you taking the time and joining us today. This concludes our episode of Muslims and Mental Health. We do appreciate any feedback and concerns or questions anyone has, and you can send them to nafshealertherapy@gmail.com. That's NAFSHEALER therapy@gmail.com. In addition, if you are a business or a philanthropist, we are looking for advertisers and sponsors. So if you like what you've seen today on our show, please contact us again at nafshealertherapy@gmail.com. NAFSHEALER therapy@gmail.com. Thank you.